Somewhere amongst the tinsel, trinkets, and toys, we've lost the Christmas story. It's not Santa Claus's fault, so don't blame him. Don't blame Macy's either. We lost Christmas long before Old St. Nick and Cabbage Patch dolls. For example, just answer this one question. How many wise men visited Jesus? Fill in the blanks. We, kings of Orient, are bearing gifts. We traveled so far. 3, right? Wrong. The Bible never says how many wise men there were, and it definitely doesn't say 3. That number has been passed down, most likely because there were 3 gifts brought to Jesus. Gold representing his royalty, frankincense representing his priesthood, and myrrh representing his suffering and the healing he would bring. It's only one example among many errors in our modern view of the incarnation of Christ. And because we lost the details in the Christmas story, we lost a lot of the power of the story as well. So what is the real story of the wise men? Here goes. It took about a year of traveling for these men from the east to get to Jerusalem. They carried piles of gold in their caravan. It was the most precious commodity in that day. These men were obviously very influential. Most likely they were counselors to kings. Famed astronomers usually were. Now consider this. Do highly influential men carrying gobs of gold travel across the Arabian desert alone? No. They bring a train of servants, supplies, and armed guards. In other words, this was a big caravan. It most likely had a lot of people and wielded a lot of power. Here's what Matthew tells us. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. Is it possible for 3 simple travelers to trouble all Jerusalem? No. This caravan was big enough to get the capital city's attention. And what the wise men said to Herod was an even bigger deal. You see, Herod was one of the most evil and vindictive rulers in the history of Israel. No one got in his way. So, as you might imagine, this message about the newborn King of the Jews bothered Herod just a little bit. That's because Herod fashioned himself as the real King of the Jews. And to make matters worse, he didn't have any baby sons in the house. So Herod got some smart Jewish scholars together for a little discussion about the coming Messiah. Here's what he asked them. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, Matthew 2, 4 through 5. These were strange bedfellows indeed. Herod, the local representative of Caesar, and the Jewish leaders who hated Caesar, all together as one happy family. You know the rest of the story. Herod sent the wise men off to find Christ. When they didn't return, he sent his soldiers into Bethlehem to kill every male child under 2 years old. Echoing the tragic killing of the Hebrew slave babies, all the males in Pharaoh's time, when Moses was raised up as a deliverer of his people. It seems that when there is a godly change approaching, and saviors being born, destined to free many people. Satan and all of hell go into a frenzy, trying to kill anyone who may qualify. It's interesting to note that even in our day, there has been a massive killing off of the unborn. About a third of our generation didn't make it out alive. Abortion remains as the #1 cause of death in the world today. And we have been killing more babies than ever before. Just following along with the historic example set down in scriptures, it seems that we too are on the verge of a massive move of justice and a great spiritual awakening unlike the world has ever seen. And Satan is kicking and screaming, doing all he can, desperately trying to kill off the deliverers that God is sending, even in the form of babies. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph escaped, but just barely. Herod later died. Jesus lived, died, and rose again to earn an inheritance of nations. The King of the Jews became the king of everything, and Herod went down in the books as one of history's biggest losers. Now stop for a moment and go back to the scene at Herod's palace. There's something strange that occurred, and we need to look at it for a moment. What do we know? We know there was a star, an out of the ordinary astronomical sign. We know that these very wise astronomers traveled a very long time to visit a new king. Apparently, because they believed God told them to do so. We also know the Messiah was to be born in Bethlehem, translated from Hebrew as the house of bread, representing Jesus' life-giving, spiritually nourishing properties for all of humanity, and him being placed in a feeding trough, no less. The prophetic symbolism rolls off the page. Jesus was born in Bethlehem at exactly the same time the prophets had foretold that the Messiah was supposed to be born. But what is so remarkable about this story is not what is there, but what is missing. Despite all the facets, Herod sent an invasion force, and the Jewish leaders apparently went home to take it easy for the night. Now, considering everything they knew, what should they have done? Herod should have realized God was in charge, and the faith of many who had gone before had successfully latched on to God's promises and were pulling them to earth, giving God permission to act. Herod would have done well to go and worship the Messiah with the wise men, humbly. The Jewish leaders should have welcomed Jesus as their true king. Herod was a megalomaniac at this point, and he couldn't help himself. Instead of worship, he attacked. The Jewish leaders were truly without excuse. They were so concerned with the opinions of Herod and of their palace, their place at the table, that they dismissed Christ altogether, even after telling Herod the correct address for the birth of the Messiah. They could have at least paid Jesus a little visit. If they had, just like the wise men, they would have ended up in the community church's annual living manger scene, living nativity. Instead, the Jewish leaders did nothing. Their actions are remarkable only in their absence. Even though they knew the time and place of the long-awaited Messiah's birth. Sadly, the same has been true for much of the church today. Our primary responsibility as spiritual warriors is to fight for the kingdom. And step number 1 is recognizing that the kingdom has come. We do this first by doing the very opposite of what Herod did. Instead of fighting against God, we should fight with him. We give up demanding creature comforts and our own preferences and suit up for war. And what an honor it is to be commanded by the King of the universe, Christ the warrior king. Herod wanted to keep his own kingdom intact. He had a comfortable position at the top of the Palestinian food chain, and he was intent on keeping it. We may be tempted to make fun of Herod until we realize that many of us have it pretty good too. Food, comfort, peace, rest, and on-demand movies, 3 square meals a day, and a complimentary Wi-Fi. Much in our lives has often been selfish and shallow, even though we also know the time and place of the coming of the King, who has already arrived and daily knocks at the door of our hearts, our homes, our churches, requesting a deeper relationship, a closer connection. Think about it. If Herod were to visit the average 21st century American home, he would give up his entire first century kingdom to stay here. You could see the shock on King Herod's face as he tours your average home. Wait a second, you pull this lever and fresh water just comes out? When does it stop? Never? We have it pretty good. Honestly, how much of your life is spent doing only what you want to do, despite the fact God calls us so much higher? How much of our lives is spent accumulating more convenience, more control? And this is not a call to navel-gazing and self-centric Christian guilt-tripping. It's a wake-up call. There is a world around us that needs help. And the kingdom has come and is available deeply, personally, with greater power than many of us have yet been told. The first step in recognizing the kingdom is nothing more than a step of awareness. We simply open our eyes to the world around us and ask the question, what would it take here to see God's will be done? It starts with opening our eyes so we can move out of our own temporary sandcastle kingdoms into the permanent kingdom of heaven, growing in us and around us. Herod refused to do that, and he lost in the end. The good news is it is not too late for you and me. In the second place, recognizing Christ's kingdom is to do the very opposite thing the Jewish leaders did. Frankly, they should have known better, but they were far too comfortable and addicted to control to do anything risky. The very act of worshiping the newborn king would have led to their losing prestige and power. That wasn't going to happen anytime soon, as far as they were concerned. Therefore, worship was not an option. So, as baby Jesus fled for his life, the religious elite sat in Jerusalem in all their temporary wealth and comfort. Unlike the Jewish leaders recognizing the kingdom, to be captivated by God's vision for life more than our own means to worship with no strings attached. It means to give up anything we love more than Christ. It means to give up the pursuit of prestige for the power of His presence. And all of creation waits and groans for the maturing and the revealing of the sons and daughters of God, taking back their rulership in order to set all of creation free from the death force of decay and entropy, futility that we unwittingly unleashed upon them all the way back in the Garden of Eden when we chose to try out being our own gods, choosing mere knowledge of good and evil over life itself. As often as we may get distracted by lesser gods and lesser goals, as we turn back to Christ, we automatically turn from idols and find ourselves back in the fight for the kingdom. There is no condemnation. We are forgiven. We have God's permission to stop feeling guilty and start fighting. Last, as we recognize the coming of the kingdom, we see Christ's incarnation was an all-out assault on the dark kingdom in the world. But all too often, instead of going on the attack, we have chosen to retreat while quoting quasi-Christian powerless platitudes of nonsensical nothingness like God is in control, wrongly implying that people have no responsibility for their desires, decisions, and destiny, and the results that we get in life based on what we choose to set our attention upon. The promises of God for perfect provision and protection in every area. Or the promises of the devil and the world. For strife, striving, struggling in every area. Even the season of Jesus' birth showcases a broken human mess of poverty, injustice, and mass murder. It's a sad, startling, gruesome tale of a family fleeing for their lives. Due to divine warning dreams and the help of angels, they finally make it out of the country to safety. And yet, a few days later, there is not a baby boy left alive in Bethlehem. The birth of Christ was an assault on behalf of the kingdom of heaven against the kingdom of this world. A military campaign of epic proportions. This takes us back to our first point. When we lose the details in the story, we lose the meaning of the story. Ultimately, it wasn't about Jesus meek and mild. It was about Jesus, the warrior king, invading enemy-occupied territory to rescue the human hostages, many of whom didn't even know they had been captured. And some of whom didn't even want to be rescued. It was a battle, and Jesus was fiercely opposed throughout his entire life on earth. This point is critical because as we begin to follow the warrior king for ourselves, we expect to be opposed as well. The thief, Christ tells us, comes to steal, kill, and destroy. John 10:10. As we begin to take back what has been stolen, killed, or destroyed, we must be ready for a fight, just like when Jesus arrived on the scene. The good news, of course, is God plans great rescues, and God loves happy endings. He is not controlling the situation because love is not controlling. But he is fighting, calling, reaching. He fought in Bethlehem and he fought on the cross. He won both times. He will fight for you also, which means when you fight together with him, you will win too. Now here's the paradox. Recognizing the king restores our childlikeness. In God's kingdom, the more we grow down, the more we grow up.